Oh, how are you all? This is not going to be a long one. It's certainly not going to be a very long one, but we'll see what we can get through. And to be honest, the way the report structures is that it kind of bounces between quite a lot of things. So yeah, this is part two of the Carmont derailment kind of mini series, if you like. At the moment, I think they're probably going to be three. There might end up being four, depending on how little I get through tonight. Screen time is giving me throbbing headaches, and my whole body aches. I don't know if it is the coronavirus, but LFTs haven't been as successful at picking up the latest variant, so it could be. In any case, we shall battle through, and we shall start with me making sure that I've got the right bit of my window kind of clicked. We'll start with the coronavirus statistics. So, how are things looking? Well, they are looking, I think, when it comes to the travel statistics, I think we're at the point where, well, you can see that there's the sort of general steady climb. It's still kind of continuing, but I'm inclined to think that we have reached, that we might have plateaued and reached what will be the new, certainly for the short term, while the government doesn't know what it's doing and has no idea how to actually drive modal shift. I think we might well, for fear of making a false prediction, we might well have reached the sort of plateau for rail usage for now, at around the 80% mark. But let us scoot. So that's the overall picture. But let's zoom in on them. Excuse me. Let's zoom in on this year. So the general climb from January. Up we go. You can see we were kind of bumping around between here and here. We have been bumping around the 80% mark. So rail is at 80%. At the moment ish, and that there's a mixture. So long distance services are over 100% in quite a few cases, particularly on the East Coast. Avanti a bit further behind. Well, that's because Avanti gets used by a lot of commuters in a way that's different to the East Coast, which is a lot of leisure travellers, longer distance leisure travellers. So cycling, road usage has plateaued. Interestingly, lower than if we go back. It's actually plateaued lower than previously. So the previous plateau that it reached was closer to the 100% mark, around kind of here. It was around about 100%. And it's kind of looking like it's plateaued at a lower point now. So maybe kind of, if we go back to this shot, maybe even kind of 95% mark is which is interesting. It's an interesting observation there. The road plateau, cycling. It's nice weather. People like cycling, so this is good. We like to see this. Happy face. What about buses? Buses again. Actually, it's interesting. Buses and rail seem to have converged, which I always thought buses would sit slightly above. They appear to have converged, but actually, I suppose perhaps that's. Actually, you know what? I have no idea. With my brain being as fuzzy as I cannot make any sort of suggestion. But it's a very good point. Gareth Williams makes a very good point that this 80% for rail, bearing in mind that we are running a timetable that in some cases is still around 50%. 50% timetable. So that's not for all talks, but for some. For some talks, there we are. So it's difficult to tell until we have a full timetable running. It's difficult to tell where that hit is, but I'm inclined to think a lot of those numbers will be through London commuting. The reduction in standard commuters through the centre of London. There are some good GB Rail transition team statistics being released. I'm going to ask for another release of those because they're very interesting. And then Tom Cairns and I also have a look at the timetable again to work out who's running what level of service, because that's also quite interesting to see what that impact might be. Yes, so that's all that. Let us run at Huddersfield to Castleford is running at 0%, other than a couple of buses at peak time. Yeah, well, quite. Service levels are really low. Alfonso Lapulce is saying, service levels are particularly low down. Tom is wondering, is saying, can't imagine why cycling nosedived. Yeah, something about the weather, I think, might have had an impact, absolutely. Anyway, actually, let me just double check double check this. Yes, okay, good, fine. Sorry, I'm just checking my slide deck. So, let's crack on. There's no news this episode because next week will be a big bumper news catch-up because there's so much to do. But we are talking about the three C's of the causes of Carmont. Last time we talked about construction design management, so CDM, really talking about the drains. This time we're talking about crisis management and kind of the control of the railways. That's what we're going to be covering, although I think we might skip back to talking about more broad sort of control and management issues if we get to some of the contributing factors, which are also kind of scattered about in a way that's not necessarily hugely logical. But there are some things that we might pick out there, so we'll have a look at those. Without further ado, let's go on with the show. Welcome to tonight's Rail Natter, everyone. Is actually episode 108. I did not correct that. Whoopsies. My brain is very fuzzy. There's the Intercity 225 fading away. Very nice. And yes, this is a continuation of episode 106, which was part one. The look at the detailed look at the final report. We kind of looked at in some pretty reasonable detail, I think, at the drain itself. So. So that kind of we looked at that, but what we're going to do this time is continue working our way through the PDF. So we're not jumping around. We're going to continue working our way through and pick up the kind of in fact, yeah, we're going to go through and have a look at crisis management particularly. Worth saying, of course, same as last time, the content warning for everyone. Descriptions and images from rail crashes. Yes, this is going to contain kind of actually that last episode and this episode aren't perhaps quite as bleak. I think the next episode is probably going to be the worst one, episode 3. But nonetheless, there's a chance that there's descriptions of things that you might find upsetting, particularly if you have been if you have been kind of if you have been impacted or indeed if you've been involved in a rail crash, there's a chance this might bring back some memories. But also for people who just don't like the who are going to be triggered by the kind of talking about the incident, then just a bit of a content warning for you. So, Gareth, yes, I'm sounding subdued. No, I'm ill, very ill. My head hurts, and looking at the screen is hurting me, and all the light shining in my eyes is giving me a headache. But so this will be a short one, but I'll be damned if the Rona is stopping me from continuing my every single week since I started this, there being an episode streak. That's not stopping me. So we've talked about the 3 C's. We've done CDM, so we've done this one. This is no good being red, is it? Let's just change this to white. We have done CDM, we have done crisis management is what we're going to do. So we've kind of done a bit of CDM. We're going to do a bit of so that was kind of episode 1. Part 2 is going to be looking at crisis management a bit, and we might bounce. There might be a bit of we might bounce back and forth between these two, and then probably episode 3 will end up being talking about crashworthiness. So we're going to talk about these 3 things, but this episode we're going to be talking about crisis management. And we're going to be going back to the RAIB report. Let's see what we can do. So let's flick back to the PDF and just full screen it. So I think we got to this point. We got to the point where we were moving on to paragraph 190, which was, or 189 rather, which was talking about the risk to train operation from summer convective storms. And this is one of the conclusions of the report, which is that Network Rail did not have suitable arrangements in place to allow timely and effective adoption of additional operation my brain is too mushy for this. We are podcasting. Network Rail did not have suitable arrangements in place to allow timely and effective adoption of additional operational mitigations in case of extreme rainfall, which could not be accurately forecast. It's a hell of a mouthful. But yes, that is to kind of condense that down. These summer convective storms that were responsible for the extreme rainfall. Let's bring my little face back as well. I don't know if you want to see me. I look far better than I am, I have to be honest. These kind of extreme rainfall events are not easy to forecast, and Network Rail do not have suitable arrangements in place to mitigate against those sorts of extreme rainfall events. These events are quite difficult to forecast in enough precision to be useful. So that's one of the challenges, and that's kind of what we're going to go through here. And these italic bits here. Actually, I just use my mouse. These bits here, these sort of headings, are a breakdown then of this overall challenge here. So the start, the initial explainer here is going through kind of the general structure of ScotRail, Scotland's Railway. It's daft that it's called Scotland's Railway in capital letters. I'm hoping that they'll just refer to everything as ScotRail soon. Oh, I think I can hear Hoover. I think there's hoovering going on in the house. Is that just me? Oh yeah, no, it's that's happening. Anyway, don't worry about that. So, Network Rail is responsible for the provision, maintenance, operation of railway infrastructure. So Network Rail do the infrastructure. They employ route control staff who coordinate the railway operations. They manage variations from timetable services. Railway staff. Other than in extreme circumstances and in the absence of alternative instructions, railway staff are required to operate timetabled services without seeking explicit authority for their actions. So that's a kind of an interesting and relevant point that'll come up. ScotRail is the train operating company. They have now. Then this is a news item. They've been nationalised. They have actually been nationalised. ScotRail is now part of the Scottish Government, and rightly so. Operates most passenger train services in Scotland, including the one in the accident. It provides the rolling stock. It doesn't actually say in the report here. It provides the rolling stock through a leasing company, and the train crew are ScotRail, and together with managers and control room staff, there are ScotRail. So there's a mix. So Network Rail have control room staff, and Network Rail have control room staff, both working together. ScotRail operates a railway timetable agreed with Network Rail, subject to real-time alterations, required to deal with unexpected and or unusual events. And an agreement between Network Rail and ScotRail created the ScotRail Alliance to encourage close collaboration. Blah blah blah. Yeah, fine. They each retain responsibility for the things that they have had responsibility for in the previous arrangement, but as part of the alliance, they kind of generally work together to try and improve the way the railway functions. So there's some more stuff about shifts and patterns and the different sorts of staff, and I think we'll break that down a bit more. Going kind of in the paragraphs coming up. Oh, my headache is bad. Weather-related management processes. So. There is a Network Rail standard, NRL2 OPS 021, which is weather, managing the operational risks. And that was updated in June 2019. That was the version, certainly the extreme weather, and how to kind of processes to be adopted when extreme weather was forecast, and sort of these sort of IWMPs, these integrated weather management plans, how to create those is referenced in that standard 021, and also there are other things that feed into it as well. So there's a relevant section of the standard that they quote here. At times of significantly heightened rainfall intensity, increased proportions of the network will become susceptible to failure. Therefore, consideration needs to be given to dynamically assessing the risks regardless of whether there are any cutting slopes or embankments in the documented IWMP for the geographical area under threat. There you go. This is going to be quite a processy one, but it'll get relevant soon, I assure you. The new version. There's another standard procedure. 045 network NRL3 OPS 045 -3.17. There you are. That's the standards here. With a 2020 date, which was current when the accident occurred, defined delivery unit. That's the maintainer, the people who maintain the railway. Asset management and control responsibilities for taking action in response to extreme weather. At the time of the accident, Network Rail had instructed its weather forecast provider to use a revised set of national alert thresholds. At the time of the accident, that standard had not been amended to include the revised national alert thresholds. There is no evidence that this inconsistency was a factor in the accident. Okay, well, they've just included it as a point of reference. So these are the thresholds, and they kind of, you can see for different types of weather, they pick out normal, aware, adverse, or extreme. So that's levels 0 to 3, if you like. Those are the three different the different options there you've got. So that's those. Now if we go down to, so that covers rain, it covers extremes of temperature, frost there, snowfall indeed, and then wind at the top as well. So these are the ones that are in the standard, and these are the ones that have been provided by the forecaster. I presume it's the Met Office, to be honest. There. And so Network Rail had established a national contract for a specialist organisation to provide bespoke forecasts structured around the specific weather thresholds and including statements giving a level of confidence in the forecast. They've not actually said who it is. I wonder if it is the Met Office. Maybe they did. Maybe they got some other provider to do that. I have to speak to Alex about that to see. Anyway, so there we are. So we've got this. Scotland's Railway developed a kind of a slightly different thing to this IWMP. They had the Adverse and Extreme Weather Plan. Another acronym, basically does the same thing. It included, so it's including elements of 021, elements of 045, and listed specific locations. It was basically kind of specific to the network, the ScotRail's network, and picked out earthworks at particular risk of failure, bridges with foundations that could be undermined by high river flows, areas that are subject to flooding, and a few things like that. And so they're kind of the. Don't worry, this will get less dry momentarily, I promise. It's just, this is sort of scene setting for now. So here are the pictures of the various forecast areas you've got here, and you can see that all of the stuff in white there fits into the Perth weather area. Just basically Perth is in charge of managing that area, that forecast area. And that kind of also, this is relevant to different sorts of places that get to different levels of weather. Kind of, they do see this influence. There's less risk up for these parts, and then this side of the country generally gets most rain shadow from so you can see the Highland areas where a lot of the rain will fall. Some of the rain fall, but a lot of the rain falls in the Glasgow area. You can see the purple here. In any case, those are the different forecast areas that kind of are alluded to in that in that adverse and extreme weather plan with the different forecast areas. So here's some challenges that we're going to see, and this will happen. The report gets fiddly here because it's referring forwards on itself. Paragraph 302, and we're only at 202. So it's going to be this bit was always going to be a bit tricky to communicate through because it's a little bit fiddly and a little bit process driven. But essentially, this is pointing out that that plan did not mention the area where the accident happened, but it mentioned areas a few miles south and a few miles north. 1.6 miles and 2.1 miles either side of the washout area of where the accident actually happened. The other thing is that route control did not declare this day, the 12th of August, to be a red day. We'll get there. So no additional measures, such as periodic inspections, were being provided at these locations on that morning. That's clearly an inadequate. It's an inadequacy that's being pointed out there. So Network Rail had no reason to believe that drain was at risk of a washout. It was less than 10 years old and constructed within a regime intended to result in infrastructure compliant with modern standards. Absolutely. If it's a new thing, you expect it to work, right? It's possible that an inspection of the drain would have identified that it was not performing as expected, but even if this had been recognised, it's uncertain whether the potential for a serious washout would have been appreciated and the earthwork added to the list of sites in that plan, in that extreme weather plan. Although the drain was associated with a railway earthwork which is not on the at-risk list, it would have benefited from any general mitigation applied in the area due to the intensity and duration of the rainfall. Okay, so it's sort of saying that it would have been caught by the kind of the requirements of that plan. This plan the extreme weather plan required inputs from various parts of Network Rail, train operating companies and some other organisations, including input from a weather service provided by a specialist organisation. A brief description of the functions most relevant to understanding accident causation is given below. Okay, so this is just going through Right, okay, so, yeah. Where adverse or extreme weather is forecast or occurs, route control staff are responsible for coordinating inputs from other parts of Network Rail, ScotRail, other organisations operating trains in Scotland, and specialist contractors. If train services are disrupted by the weather or by weather-related precautions, route control is responsible for managing the effects on these services. So that's the team in the route control centre at. Actually, are they down in Glasgow now? Has it been centralised? It used to be Edinburgh and Glasgow, and I think they are consolidating in Glasgow. Cowlairs is the route operating centre, or the railway operating centre. Most railway earthworks were constructed before modern earthwork design methods were developed, and the condition of some has deteriorated since construction. That's a euphemism and a half. Good grief! That's the understatement of the century. Network Rail has undertaken significant amounts of physical work intended to improve the stability of earthworks, but it is not practical to bring all earthworks up to modern design standards. So many earthworks are at greater risk of failure during extreme weather, such as heavy rain, than an earthwork constructed to modern standards. Okay, fine. So this then says Network Rail's geotechnical asset management teams are responsible for noticing where there are areas that earthworks might fail, and then those need to then get added into the extreme weather plan. Before the Carmont accident, mitigation typically involved preserving slopes for signs of movement and then stopping trains or reducing their speed if there is evidence of significant movement or exceptional water flows. Okay, fine. So that's generally just saying the maintenance teams are the ones responsible for those routine inspections and then looking after the earthworks as well. Fine. So the maintenance teams are the ones who might then observe earthworks that are on the at-risk list and then pointing out that it's a problem. The process applied by Scotland's route control staff on the day was broadly consistent with the process described in the extreme weather plan. But it was at a significant variance with Network Rail's national standards for managing extreme weather. This is the interesting bit. So Scotland was doing things differently to the rest of Network Rail, and as we might explore, this caused problems. This is where devolution of standards can become a problem. Yeah. Upon receipt of the forecast. Within control, the route control, the RCM, the route control manager, I think, was required by the extreme weather plan to evaluate the forecast and allocate a route alert code. That would then be communicated throughout Network Rail Scotland. According to the national standards, weather forecasts in the days leading up to the accident and actual rainfall of the day of the accident should have resulted in route control staff declaring a red route alert on the day of the accident. This would have led to one or more extreme weather action teleconferences, EWATs, crikey. Basically a Zoom call, or actually a Teams call, when everyone would say, right, these are the challenges we've got, this is where we expect it to be bad, here's what we need to do. At which weather-related responses from various parts of the rail industry should have been coordinated. Although no call happened, there's strong evidence that doing so would have had no practical effect on the event at Carmont. This is because Scotland's call implemented mitigation included in the extreme weather plan, which did not require rainfall-related mitigation measures around Carmont. So that's a bit of a challenge there. The risk of severe localised rainfall in parts of Scotland had been recognised a couple of days before the accident. But at this time, the risk of severe rainfall in the Carmont area was not reflected in the detailed area forecast used by Network Rail. This resulted in a structure's asset manager sending an email at 3:15 the day before, referring to this and the need. On the 10th, 2 days before, referring to the need for maintenance staff to visit the bridges that are at risk of scour. In response to this email, the route asset manager for geotechnics, the geotechnical sent an email to route control, including the following extracts, which refer to the Network Rail Weather Service. Right, so this is quite a chunky amount here. Okay, so basically, due to the unpredictable nature of this rainfall, maintenance to use local knowledge where possible to self-instruct visits to earthworks sites if concerns are raised from real-time feedback. Okay, so that's fine. The notes below show, so they're just pointing out that there is severe risk of localized rainfall events, and then saying that the notes below show the kind of areas that are of concern. Control to make best endeavours to respond to any reports of localized flooding in the vicinity of earthworks named in the extreme weather plan. They're talking about cab rides, site inspection are acceptable during daylight hours, speed restriction is acceptable during the hours of darkness or in daylight if there aren't resources for inspection. In the first instance, they're referring to this list of earthworks that are in that plan, which didn't include Carmont, remember. And then the geotech RAM is saying they're going to continue to monitor, and then they're saying that the above approach is in keeping with the kind of extreme weather plan. Also, in response to the email sent by the... let's see, so that was sent by the... Yes, so... so the structures asset manager's email, another email exchange took place between route control staff later the same day. It included an email referring to an earlier email. Emails. I'm concerned that the responsibility of identifying the structures being put at risk by localized flooding is being put onto the incident controller to do at very short notice. There is only one incident controller for the west and one for the east covering the whole of Scotland. We're also following social distancing guidelines at the moment. During disruptive events, our time is consumed by managing the response and dealing with the recovery. With the forecast predicting lightning and significant rainfall, this could lead to many substantial incidents to deal with. We also have other incidents not relating to the weather that could play a factor. There's a fatality, some bridge strikes, those sorts of things. Not to mention CRTs, as in speed restrictions as a result of high temperatures. I'm worried that we will not be able to pinpoint the designated structures in the plan in time, contact the PWAY team, arrange the response and coordinate these within the necessary timescales at such short notice, especially if we are overwhelmed by other incidents. The benefit of our regular practice in preparing for scouring embankments and cutting inspections is that we are preparing the maintenance department in advance to give them time to arrange the resources required within the timescales. Right, okay, so there's a few communications there that are slightly worrying. Yes. Reviewing these emails shows that the geotechnical team understood risks could arise at any earthworks, not just those listed in the emergency plan. Yes, this risk was illustrated by the landslips at Ironies Bridge and south of Lawrence Kirk. Neither occurred at locations in the at-risk list. And it's demonstrated by analysis of previous earthworks failures. So the geotechnical team understood that. The geotechnics RAM referred to the application of mitigation at sites not on the at-risk list. The Scottish extreme weather plan only lists mitigation for at-risk earthworks, which is consistent with the Network Rail standard, but it provides no guidance on how risk other earthworks should be managed. So that's a shortcoming. It's saying, well, basically we can ignore the other earthworks that aren't at risk, which, as we know, is not the case, right? That's a problem. Alfonso de Pulce is pointing out that given British weather can be so variable in local areas, do we need greater local measurements? Well, things like a weather station at the head of every valley. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And with every new supercomputer, the Met Office forecasts get more and more precise. And to be honest, this is one of the things that they understand they're going to have to do, is they know that their customers, like Network Rail, are asking for more high-resolution forecasting. And actually, I think it'd be interesting to get Alex back on to talk about what the Met Office is doing in response to that, and that's a really good question. Someone put that in the Discord polls. Get Alex back on to talk about what the Met Office are doing about climate change and about high-resolution forecasting, so I think that'd be really interesting to pick up. So, the Scottish Extreme Weather Plan mentions structured expert judgment as a means of using relevant data to adjust responses, blah, blah, but it does not specifically link this to earthwork mitigation. For reasons given in the next paragraph, the RAIB concluded that it would not be appropriate for kind of expert judgment to be, basically it wouldn't be acceptable to just rely on that to work out at-risk locations. Without the benefit of some sort of fairly well-developed contingency planning, and no such contingency plans existed before Carmont. So clearly, again, some problems, some serious problems. Route control was focused on providing mitigation at sites listed in the extreme weather plan, and expressed concern about implementing mitigation beyond this list without specific evidence. This focus is also apparent from witness evidence. Okay, interesting. The geotechnical team undertook to identify earthworks not on the at-risk list, but possibly affected by the rainfall, if route control provided sufficient information about concerns in particular localities. Before the Carmont train started its northwards journey, route control staff were aware of 2 landslips and 2 flooding events within about 17.7 kilometres of the washout. So they're aware that things were going wrong. But the trouble is, the problem, there's a disconnect. So this awareness did not result in any mitigation being applied in response to these known events. It's possible that the absence of a response was influenced by workload in route control and or in the geotechnical team. Geotechnical assets affected by the extreme rainfall included 9 locations with landslips, plus earthwork failures due to the canal breach at Pullman. Remember, there'd been a huge canal breach, a huge flooding canal breach at Pullman onto the railway. So, these serious problems on the rail network have been happening already. Other points that they've picked up here. The geotechnical team had undertaken to monitor these acronyms. I'm already forgetting what these acronyms are. At the best of times, I was never going to keep on top of it. The Weather Service, I think, was checking it a couple of times a day, or in response to control notifying of events, as implied in the email 2 days before the Carmont disaster, and confirmed to the RAIB. Initiating earthwork mitigation required route control staff to inform the geotechnical team of a problem. Reliance on this alone meant there was a significant risk of a train encountering a landslip before route control was aware of a problem. The Weather Service could, if appropriately configured, have been used to determine when the geotechnical team should initiate precautions outside locations on the at-risk list. However, Network Rail had not provided the rainfall thresholds at which this should be done, and without these it was impractical for the geotechnical team to determine appropriate action while dealing with an extreme weather event. Such threshold values were introduced after the accident, so there you go. Route control staff were concerned about the availability of resources both within control and from the wider Network Rail organisation to implement weather-related precautions without more than a day's notice. So this is interesting. This is just pointing out that structured expert judgment, which is basically saying people looking at the map, looking at the weather, and guessing areas that look like, or guesstimating areas that look like they're going to be a problem. The RAIB consider that unless it's based on contingency plans, neither that nor dynamic risk assessment by geotechnical staff are appropriate ways to determine the sorts of mitigations at which earthworks should or should not be on the at-risk list. And no contingency plans were available before Carmont. The reason you need this contingency planning is because establishing appropriate responses requires historical earthwork failure data, which is not just necessarily from the British Rail Network. It's a broader view. Weather records associated with those, and then looking at those in the context of the geotechnical sort of science and the geological context. So actually, you require people outside of the standard routine maintenance or even the asset management. And asset managers are generally pretty clued into the science of this stuff, but it requires a broader view. And that's why you need to have the contingency planning has to happen much earlier than that. May require specialist technical input not available within the Network Rail team, and could require, or certainly within the local team, and this could require considerable interaction with other parts of the railway industry, including route control staff, to understand how staff management, as well as the engineering and the science, kind of influences what is likely to be on what should be on this failure list. Is everyone following this, by the way? I know this is quite heavy, but I think people are starting to see the threads being weaved now. As we're starting to get into the meat of it, I think you can see where this is going, right? Do let me know if you want me to sort of speed through this, because it's not making a huge amount of sense. The approach taken by the geotech... Okay, so... So, this is the statement... Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is the approach taken by the geotechnical and route control teams, and the interaction between them was consistent with a corporate statement provided by Network Rail in response to a previous accident that the RAIB had investigated. And the statement acknowledges that geotechnical engineers in Network Rail have always been aware that short-duration, high-intensity rainfall presents a high risk to earthworks not on an at-risk list, and includes the following extracts. So there's some stuff that was said by Network Rail's corporate statements. And okay, fine. Yeah, work had been commissioned. Since then, we've been developing awareness. You see all these things like, we're getting on there. The extreme weather plan only set out these procedures. Growing perception that we were experiencing an increase in the number of convectional rainfall events. ... This is all climate change, by the way. This is all our evolving climate having an impact on the way that weather patterns develop and how quickly they can develop and behave. So you can see here that there are some. So there's awareness of a risk associated with intense storms that cannot be reliably forecast. Particularly following derailment at Watford. We've referred to the Watford derailment, I think. Have we shown the Watford derailment? That was while I was writing my piece in Rail before Carmont happened, I'd submitted it already. The first draft had gone in, looking at earthworks and saying the next big earthwork failure, the next big derailment, potentially a fatal one, was going to be related to an earthwork failure. And like that week, it was genuinely within that kind of week or two that Carmont happened. I'd been referring to Watford there, the derailment of the train at Watford, which resulted in a train being derailed off a landslide into Watford Tunnel and nearly struck a train, but thankfully glancing rather than a head-on collision, a matter of inches. That would have been a horrific crash if if circumstances had been fractionally different. So here we are. So there's some other corporate sort of stuff saying kind of how they deal with it and the short notice forecasts and how these are dealt with. The Network Rail Weather Service was being referred to by the route asset management teams when the accident occurred at Carmont and was available to route control staff. Although it could have been configured to provide all these staff with information, including alerts showing that rainfall thresholds associated with intense rainfall had been reached in the Carmont area, this had not been done. In addition, training necessary to use these features had not been delivered. So there's a shortcoming in the weather service there. It's clearly not functioning as well as it should be. The data was coming in, but it was not being churned out. Will, were you watching this? Yeah. I think the data, this is why it's absolutely key that data is usable. It has to be understood and extraneous data got rid of. It has to just be, that sort of service needs to just provide precisely the right information. Without any faff whatsoever, so it's really key. There are lots of data. There are lots of data harbingers out there, and it's critical that all of them understand and understand what that data might be used for, and facilitate that data being. If in the case of people who don't necessarily actually create the user interface, it's a case of ensuring that data can be interpreted right by the user interface creators, but also. Understanding the use case is critical, because if you can understand the use case, then you can ensure that the information is as clear as possible. Particularly for something as critical as a weather service, there's always going to be extraneous data, and you should be able to add extra layers in if necessary. But the default view should provide the absolutely critical information, and it might well need to be responsive depending on what's happening. If that weather service is in, if you've got, for example. It might be that the interface changes automatically based on what sort of thresholds are being reached in terms of extreme weather, depending on who's looking at it. Anyway, some of that work has already happened. The weather service has been improved since this point. So here we've got observations in Inverbervie nearby, near Carmont, looking at how much rain fell on the day, in the morning of the derailment. More than 40 millimeters had fallen by 7 a.m. Basically, this shows that there was just shows the extreme levels of rainfall that occurred in that very, very short space of time. The rainfall at both locations, sort of from Inverbervie and from the accident site, significantly exceeded the 10 millimeters in 1 hour threshold, which was the red threshold, I think. And the 20 millimeters in 1 hour threshold being used by the weather forecast provider at the time of the accident. The data from both locations also shows rainfall greater than the 40 millimeters in 3 hour threshold, at which a post-accident amendment to the 045 that NOC 317, the NOP, sorry, basically the standard that referred to that provided thresholds. That's been updated since the accident. Trigger implementation of intense rainfall mitigation, including reduced train speeds. So there's an acknowledgement post-Carmont that there should have been a threshold saying reduced train speeds until there's been a full inspection of the line. So an understanding of that now, but it was just a gap. It just hadn't been thought about enough, hadn't been risk assessed properly. Knowledge of earthwork risk and rainfall data available from the weather service were sufficient for this mitigation process to have been applied in the area of the washout on the day of the accident. There's no reason for that this shouldn't have been applied on the day. So it's not good, really. Not a good reflection on risk management here. So an email from the geotechnical RAM on the 25th of June 2020 addressed the risk to earthworks not on the at-risk list. Saying that this type of rain is impossible to forecast. This is unlike winter frontal storms, which can be forecast with pretty decent confidence, 24 to 36 hours in advance. It's worth possibly briefly talking about what a convective storm is where actually you get a load of moisture is brought up into a warm air system, and then actually just essentially collapse in on itself. So you get very small, very localized, and very extreme rainfall, and this can happen in the sorts of air movements and hot weather you can get as a result of the changing climate. We've all, these sorts of things have always occurred, but they occur with increasing frequency and magnitude as we go forwards. So there we've kind of gone through there. That's some sort of serious risk management stuff there. Right, the next issue is route control staff actions in response to events overnight, 11th of August into 12th of August. This is one of the contributing factors. Although aware of multiple safety-related events caused by heavy rain, route control staff were not required to and did not restrict the speed of the train on its northward journey from Carmont to Stonehaven. This is the crux of it. If they had, the consequences would have been substantially less. Although extreme weather was included in the forecast issued early in the morning on the 11th of August, a red route alert code had not been assigned for that day by the route control manager. The alert code issued for the period 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. 6 a.m. on the 11th to 6 a.m. on the 12th was adverse, which is like level 2, not level 3. So it's like amber, not red. The reasons for this decision and its implications discussed at paragraph 298. Again, we have to skip forwards for that bit. We'll get there, folks. I think we get to that point. Although extreme weather was included in the forecast issue... I've done that bit. I've done that already. During the night, the weather had caused multiple failures and other problems on the railway infrastructure throughout Scotland's central belt and eastern areas. The cumulative effect of these failures was such that by 5 a.m, the only major route in the central and eastern parts of the country which remained unaffected was Inverness, Aberdeen, Dundee. And during the very early part of the morning, trains operated over this route without encountering any problems. Shortly before 7 a.m, route control began to receive information about weather-related issues between Aberdeen and Dundee. And at 1 minute past 7 in the morning, our train actually was brought to a stand due to the landslip near Arnie's Bridge, south of Carmont signal box. At 20 past 7, route control staff instructed the Carmont signaller to make arrangements for the train to return to Stonehaven. This journey did not start until over 2 hours later, as we know, as is kind of discussed earlier. So by 9 a.m, around 30 minutes before the return journey started, 4 obstructions of the railway within 11 miles of our train had been reported to control. These included a landslip near Arnie's Bridge, which is we knew about that one. That's the one that the driver knew about because that's why the driver had stopped. That was already kind of highlighted. Flooding affecting the down line, also close to this bridge, which I think the driver had seen. Flooding at Newton Hill, and a landslip a short distance south of Lawrencekirk as well. So it's a series of problems. Although aware of these obstructions on either side of our train, route control staff did not take any action to assess the risk to the operation of the Carmont train on its return to Stonehaven, and took no action to run the train at a reduced speed. With the exception of Network Rail's stranded train risk assessment process, there was no process requiring route control staff to assess risks to specific trains beyond general situation awareness possessed by individuals within the control function. So there was no process. So whilst you would have hoped that the route control staff would have picked that up, you've got to think about their workload that they're dealing with at the moment. There are massive failures going on all over the place, and they're thinking about passengers being stranded in poor conditions. So it's not so much that blame lies with these people, it's more that there are clearly challenges and there need to be process and hierarchies and ideally automated parts of the process that flag some of these things. So if if you have a system that's automatically picking up, oh well, there are several faults on this line and that train is there, if you had a train management system that could pick that sort of thing up, that would maybe flag a little red light for the route control manager to then go, right, actually we can't send 1 T08, 1 Tango 08 on its route, 08 on its route. This apparent lack of awareness about weather-related risk to train 1 Tango 08 contrasts with action taken when another train was reversed at Lawrencekirk Station because of the flooding at Newton Hill. That train arrived at Lawrencekirk Station about 7:15, remained there until 8:30, when it was instructed, when the local signaller was instructed to return that train to Dundee. When giving this instruction, an informal exchange between route control and the Lawrencekirk signaller identified that the train had been at Lawrencekirk for over an hour and led control to instruct the signaller that he should advise the driver of that train heading back to run at a reduced speed. The instruction was given, but there was no opportunity for the driver to implement it, as he stopped the train shortly after leaving the station because he encountered a landslip, so he didn't get very far. It's possible that route control staff would have required our train to travel northwards at reduced speed if they had given further consideration to the associated weather-related risk after instructing the Carmont signaller to return it to Stonehaven. So our train was stranded for 2.5 hours, and there's a risk assessment required. So 045, our standard that we were looking at earlier, requires a risk assessment for stranded trains and includes guidance that this should be done within 30 minutes of the train becoming stranded and with further assessments at intervals appropriate to the circumstances. The procedure states that this is a joint responsibility of the Network Rail Control and the Train Operating Company Control, so both Network Rail and ScotRail had responsibility to do that. The alliance arrangements in Scotland meant that the relevant staff from both organisations were located in the same route control, so they could probably, they don't need to both do it. One of them could undertake that assessment. Stranded train risk assessments are intended to assess the welfare of the passengers to determine whether they should be evacuated from the train. In the case of passengers on our train, their low numbers and the presence of functional toilets, air conditioning and other on-board services meant that although the prolonged delay south of Carmont signal box was inconvenient, their welfare was not at risk. That's quite a reasonable assessment. That's not a bit full train, everything's functioning. It's quite a reasonable assessment to make. Furthermore, the rural nature of the road network in this area, combined with considerable disruption to the roads caused by the weather, meant that any evacuation of the passengers to road transport would have been hazardous. It would have potentially would have actually made things worse. Let's see. Now, David Shepherd. No, I don't know if there isn't a weather station attached to Carmont signal box, but to be honest, it's not the sort of thing that's hugely useful because most of these signal boxes will eventually, in fairly short order, be disappearing. So there's not much use in having weather stations like that. Whether we have, and if we were going to put weather stations at all the at-risk locations around the rail network, it would be impossible. And Network Rail is not a weather forecasting organization, so it's down to what you want to do ideally in this situation is have, and you might have install localized weather measuring things for certain features, particular key features, but you couldn't do it frequently enough to have picked this up, for example. And this comes down to this absolutely comes down to Network Rail to the Met Office managing improving the quality and the resolution of their forecasts. That's what it all comes down to. So that's understandable. But that risk assessment we've talked about was not actually carried out. Witness evidence indicates that this was an oversight due to the high workload in route control caused by the large number of incidents being managed. The circumstances of our train and the lack of immediate welfare issues for the passengers mean that it is improbable that a stranded train risk assessment would have led route control staff to take action relating specifically to passenger welfare needs. However, although not part of the documented process, it is possible, but unlikely, that an assessment in the knowledge of surrounding infrastructure problems would have triggered a decision by route control staff to require movement of our train at a reduced speed. So that could have caught it. Not necessarily, in fact, quite unlikely, but it could. It's a possibility it could have. So, the resources available for route control staff. Oh, I'm tasting things funny, which is generally I bet it is COVID. The LFTs have not picked it up, but I'm getting smells and tastes that are very funny. I need to bring some whiskey up here to smell, just to get the smell to work out whether I can smell things. Excuse me, everyone. I'm drinking because otherwise I'm going to collapse. So, route control is routinely resourced to deal with the problems likely to arise as a normal consequence of railway operation. Typically, these include equipment failures, staffing issues, problems associated with adverse weather that is normally encountered. This resource can be insufficient to deal with exceptional events. Evidence that route control staff were overloaded on the morning of the 12th is provided by witness evidence. The number of events listed in Appendix D, the severity of some of these events, and omission of the stranded risk assessment for our Carmont train. So they're clearly being massively overworked here. It's serious, crisis mode. Which I have to say, in my head, and maybe this will get looked at, maybe they'll mention this, is if resourcing is becoming an issue, frankly, I think it's right that the railway applies a blanket speed restriction of 50 miles an hour to minimise risk. I don't think that's an unreasonable risk mitigation approach to say, actually, we are not resourced enough that we can safely manage trains. Let's just put a blanket speed on the area we're responsible for. I wonder if they'll pick up on that. It's or perhaps that's actually been picked because ultimately you need people to be looking after this stuff, and if they're being stretched thin, then you can't be running trains around at speed. It's like railroads online. If you haven't got someone on the train, it might disappear off and do something horrible. You need to have enough people to look after the system. It's possible for further resources to be brought into control to deal with abnormal circumstances. One option was an additional member of staff brought on duty to operate a specific weather desk. Okay, fine. This relied on a competent individual being available and willing to work overtime. A weather desk had been introduced in response to adverse weather in Scotland in June 2020. However, no weather desk was operated on the night of the 11th and 12th, and there is no evidence suggesting that serious consideration was given to seeking volunteers to staff this. That's not good. An alternative source of additional resource is the implementation of senior management incident control, Gold Command, and this is described in NRL2 OPS 250, Network Rail National Emergency Plan. This deploys a cadre of senior managers who can be tasked with managing a specific problem or incident, such as an adverse weather event. Although Network Rail procedures describe this implementation as being decided by that call, the EWAT meeting. The route control managers within Scotland sometimes did it without that meeting, so they did it without that call. During the night of the 11th 12th, the night shift RCM considered implementing the Gold Command structure to better manage the weather issues. However, despite the level of disruption already known about and the forecast of further extreme weather, he did not do so because he judged that by the time the necessary staff had been mobilised, the need for the additional support would have receded. It's not an unreasonable conclusion to come to. Had a Gold Command structure been implemented earlier, it is possible that the railway's ability to respond more effectively would have increased. Absolutely. So while it's not an unreasonable conclusion to draw, it could have solved the problems if that had happened earlier. The following morning, before the accident at Carmont occurred, the day shift route control manager, in conjunction with the head of integrated control, so that's the integrated control is between Network Rail and ScotRail, decided to implement Gold Command to manage the recovery from the weather issues. However, the time taken to implement this decision meant that this did not become operational until 10:15, shortly after the accident happened. A second separate command structure was then created to manage the issues related to the accident specifically. It is possible that had the additional resource been available at route control earlier on that day, on the 12th, consideration of damage elsewhere in Scotland, including the 4 events in that area, would have led to the recognition of the events in the Lawrence Kirk Newton Hill area, which would have led to the recognition of potential threat to our train from the extreme weather in the vicinity of in the vicinity of Carmont. And it's possible that this would have led to action being taken to mitigate that threat. These are some of the serious problems associated with it. Yeah, Hazels is pointing out that blanket speeds did go in advance for the last few storms. Yeah, I think they went in for the storms. They didn't go in for the resourcing. Say there's some sort of event that's pulling the resourcing. Say it's a football day, and if I think it would be a correct process to have that if operational staff, for whatever reason, there'd be a load of train delays, and then there's football trains, or some massive event like that. And if operational staff in a control centre were feeling stretched, I think it should be within their right to apply a blanket speed restriction to their area until and it might be only a short period, but that would then be lifted as they got resources and felt like they were in control of the situation. It might be that it would only happen for an hour or two, but that, and yes, that would cause more disruption. But ultimately, the whole point is that reducing speeds to 50 miles an hour massively reduces the risk of issues of train, particularly for trains in extreme weather event. Okay, trains hitting each other generally is much less likely to happen these days, thankfully. But the risk from things like landslides is massively reduced if you drop below 100 kilometers an hour, but certainly below 50 miles an hour, because the energy is that much less that the likelihood of generally there's a flipping point above and below 50 miles an hour. Above and below 50 miles an hour is the difference between whether you're going to have a fatal or non-fatal incident, to be honest. That threshold sort of sits there. It sits between 80 and 100 kilometers an hour, just based on past experience. Campaign for North East Rail is pointing out that blanket speed restrictions go out for all weather warnings now, in their experience. That's a good... Gareth and Campaign for North East Rail communicate to each other. That's... Yes, and Chris McKenna points out a very good point, which is that those short-term speed restrictions due to resourcing issues could be used to analyse where and when additional resources are needed. Absolutely. David Shepherd, it's not so much about whether the driver could stop at 50 miles an hour. It's more about the fact that at that speed, there's significantly less momentum and less kinetic energy. It's a half mv squared. Remember, it's v squared, so the square of the speed. So dropping to 50 miles an hour means a lot less energy. So it's not just about stopping the train. It's just that even if at 50 miles an hour, the train would have struck the kind of the spilled material from the drain. But A, it might have stayed on track. B, it might well have stayed more on line within the track with the reduced speed. And C, even if it had continued to derail in the way that it did, the energy is such that the impact, the consequences of the derailment might have been less. So, yes. So, what time is it? Oh, crikey, we've managed to fill the hour almost already. Network Rail control staff competency requirements. Okay, right, I'm going to skip to the end of that. So, although the Network Rail route control staff had been assessed in accordance with this competence management system, the risks to the movement of the train were not considered, the stranded train risk assessment was not completed, additional resources were not sought, and the senior management incident command structure was not initiated in a timely manner. From the RAIB, that's pretty... For them to be wording it like that, they're basically saying that they do not believe... What their implication there is that the Network Rail route control staff were not competent. That's what's being said here, and I have to say it's difficult to argue with that. Further shortcomings associated with the competency management system are described in paragraphs 314 to 317. So, again, this is not pointing blame at the specific individuals. This is saying that there is not as a permanent way engineer, there are shortcomings in permanent way engineering in the fact that there is not a good competency framework within which permanent way engineers are experienced. It's all based on general. Okay, now it's changing. The permanent way institution have introduced chartership, which is a reasonably good way to measure kind of experience and knowledge. But generally, there's not. Unlike signalling, which has a very specific set of competencies, other forms of engineering on the railways don't have that. And so you have to have, there is a need for an improvement in the competency matrix there. Likewise, clearly the case for the route control staff, the competency system capturing what their experience is, how they respond to situations, and indeed their training is not good enough. It's not good enough. It certainly wasn't good enough then. The actions of the signaller and the driver. The signaller and the driver were not required to and consequently did not restrict the speed of our train to below that normally permitted. So, Tim Ballon is saying that having a look at some of the air accident investigations, Tim can see so many similarities in how air crews have lost it. Absolutely, workload management, all this sort of stuff. Is absolutely applies across the rail industry. And there's a lot and indeed the RAIB exists because of the success of the AAIB, the Air Accident Investigation Branch, in highlighting these issues. And indeed, the route control centres have learned a lot from the way that air traffic control systems operate and those kind of teams operate as well. Actions of the driver and signaller. So it's normal practice on the national rail system to operate trains at the maximum permitted speed where this is practical, safe, and in accordance with train operators' professional driving policies. There are some exceptions, such as systems used by some train operators to allow trains to be driven in a way that reduces fuel consumption while still achieving timetable requirements. Yeah, fine. The railway is an environment in which compliance with rules and procedures is expected as a fundamental part of ensuring safety. Although drivers and signallers are required to take appropriate action if aware of an infrastructure problem, the rules and procedures are based on an underpinning assumption that the infrastructure manager will give appropriate notice if trains cannot be safely operated at maximum permitted speeds. So this is kind of relevant to people I know who are in the chat, and we've talked about this when we did the interim report. Drivers operate on the railway entirely based on trust that infrastructure, that the railway that they're driving their train along will do exactly what it's supposed to do, whether that's the way that signals will behave, whether that's the fact that the track is going to be up to scratch, switches and crossings set properly, earthworks haven't failed, bridges are suitably holding the track up. The whole thing, and I've only been on a few cab rides, and every single time I did, it was hammered into me more than anything else at all. It was hammered into me that that trust is critical, and if there's any breakdown of that trust, the railway system fails. That's why drivers are so high skilled, because the way that they deal with that trust, and rightly they're paid well, is because their trust is actually critical in ensuring the safety of the passenger behind. If they were super cautious, it's not just that the railway wouldn't function properly. No one would ever get anywhere, but actually that presents a potential risk itself. So that trust is critical. That being said, so the railway rulebook makes provision for circumstances in which a signaller should instruct a train driver to proceed at caution. That's fine. Which is at caution is a way of saying driving the train at a speed that will allow the driver to stop their train short of any obstruction. So driving to the vanishing point, a bit like we drive a car. Actually, you don't drive a train. You don't drive your car like you drive a train, or vice versa. You don't drive a train like you drive a car. If you drove a train like you drive a car, you'd not get anywhere. Actually, driving a train at caution is the equivalent of driving a car. Normally, because when you're driving your car, you should always be driving your car at caution. You should never be driving faster than the point at which you can see ahead. Vanishing point driving, that's a standard way of controlling speed of a vehicle. And if you haven't been taught that, you probably shouldn't be driving, frankly. Cars, that is. So, RSSB, the Railway Safety and Standards Board, has advised that in that in an area of absolute block signalling, such as between Carmont and Stonehaven, this would typically follow application of absolute block regulation 4, obstruction danger, a process which applies only if a signaller becomes aware or suspects that there is an obstruction or other emergency on the track between them and the next signal box. This is going right back to the early days of the railway, by the way. These rules and how they exist, and that's fine. There's no problem with that rule. The Carmont signaller was aware of a number of issues caused by the adverse weather on the morning, none of which were between his signal box and the next one in the down direction of Stonehaven. That's going northwards, by the way. These included the following. So the signaller was aware of the landslip and the flooding that we've talked about before, and a lightning strike that had caused a power failure at the Carmont box. This crikey. This had disabled the block bells used by signallers to communicate between signal boxes, but the block instruments controlling train movements were still working. This meant that trains could still be signalled, but with signallers communicating between boxes using telephone calls instead of the block bells. Crikey, I hadn't realised there'd been a lightning strike. Good grief. The driver of train... By the way, there's an interesting discussion going on about how speed restrictions, like blanket speed restrictions, can be communicated, particularly to drivers who are on the move at this point. And, for long-distance drivers, they can be on shift for a long time before they... And indeed, drivers don't go back to see the notice board to look at some of the operating notices, potentially for a long... they've only at the start of their shift. So... this is where having a proper traffic management system is useful, and having an internet-connected driver advisory system. These sorts of things do exist. They're operated by some of the train operating companies. There are drivers in the chat now who might be able to say which system. Some trains have those systems in operation, others don't. But absolutely, it's right that ideally an integrated traffic management system would just be able to ping across all trains if there was a blanket speed restriction in an area. That would be a very useful tool. Will, I'm looking at you. Take note. The driver of the train of our train was aware of a landslip blocking the upline ahead of his train. He is also advised at 9:15 by the Carmont signaller that the line was blocked between Stonehaven and Aberdeen. This was due to the flooding at Newton Hill. Both the driver and the signaller were aware of the heavy rain which had fallen during the morning of the 12th of August. CCTV images show rainfall throughout the southbound journey of the train from Aberdeen until about 10 to 9, well after the train had been stopped by the landslip at Arnie's Bridge. The signaller had been on duty when radar data shows approximately 50 millimetres of rain fell in the vicinity of the signal box. And here you see the nice little signal box here. It's a pretty standard looking, it's what buildings look like in Scotland, that kind of standard slate roof. And has it got Chuckies on it? Has it actually got Harling on the walls? That would be very fun if it did, because that's even more of a Scottish thing. Anyway, the signaller had been on duty when... Oh, yeah. So the signaller had seen this intense rainfall locally. They'd definitely seen this. Although aware of both the rain and some of its effects on the immediate locality, there's no evidence that either the driver or the signaller were fully aware of the risks to rail infrastructure posed by the heavy rainfall. It's a little bit of lack of connectedness here. The Carmont signaller had no indication that the line was obstructed northwards. After passing his signal box, train 2 Bravo 13 had passed the location of the washout at 7:07, so 7 minutes past 7, and reached Stonehaven station at 7:13, with its driver subsequently confirming that he had seen no indication of a problem. So the driver had gone past where the Carmont issue was going to be, the Carmont derailment was about to occur, and hadn't spotted a problem 2 hours earlier. The Carmont signaller was told that this train had reached Stonehaven during a phone call with the Stonehaven signaller at 7:20, during which they concluded there was no known obstruction of the upline. So this could be used for the northbound movement of train of the Carmont train if necessary. Neither signaller had received any indication of any obstruction. So this is the Carmont signaller or the Stonehaven signaller. Neither of them had received any indication of an obstruction at the washout location at and after 9:08, which is when the discussion happened to authorise the movement of our train northwards. By the time the Carmont signaller authorised the movement of our train at 9:28, the weather had improved significantly. Evidence that the driver of the earlier train had not seen a problem when passing the washout location indicates that the driver of our train would have seen no evidence of a problem when passing the site in the southbound direction 8 minutes earlier at 6:59. So our driver had already been through that section and not seen a problem. So whilst that wasn't a reason to assume that everything was fine, you can understand why that's kind of logged in there, hasn't it? Let's see. So RAIB has concluded that when the train headed north towards the washout, there was no rule in place that required the train to proceed any slower than the normal maximum permitted speed. When the signaller gave the driver of our train authority to travel wrong direction, in the down direction along the upline as far as the crossover, he also advised the driver that due to the power failure affecting his signal box, he might have difficulty in clearing the signal, permitting the train to travel along the down line to Stonehaven. In the event, he was able to clear the signal normally. During this conversation, the driver queried whether there was any speed restriction to Stonehaven. The signaller replied that the line was fine between Carmont and Stonehaven and that the driver could proceed at normal speed. In response, the driver said that he would be in no rush to get there. Oh man, it's like actually making me well up a little bit reading this. It's just, this it's a quite reasonable conversation between the driver, between Brett and the signaller here, and you can kind of understand why they're coming to these conclusions. You can understand it. It's easy in the benefit of hindsight to say, oh well, they should have known, they should have understood that extreme rainfall was a risk. But actually, given their experience, but also given their roles aren't actually to, there's only so much a driver and a signaller can be doing. It's not their responsibility to be making those sorts of broad assessments. It's not their responsibility. Yes, if they can do that, great, but it isn't their responsibility. And you can understand, given the circumstances, why they didn't come to the conclusion that actually our train should have proceeded more slowly. After travelling slowly past Carmont signal box, and once the rear of our train was clear of the crossover, the driver of our train accelerated towards the washout. During this journey, the driver briefly shut off power to carry out a running brake test. This is a routine check of brake operation required because the train had reversed direction at the landslip. On-train data recording information shows that as our train reached the site of the derailment, it was travelling marginally slower than the average speed of the 19 trains, 4 of HSTs, that had passed the site of the derailment in the down direction on the previous day. So because of that brake test, it was going a little bit slower than all the other trains were going at the time. ScotRail has reviewed the on-train data recorder for our train approaching the derailment site and confirmed that it would be... so it's looked at the style of driving. This is just a kind of a routine thing you do with the on-train data recorder. Confirmed that it would be more than happy to pass a driver as competent based on the driving style, and there were no instructions or even any known issues, even any issues known to the driver that would have made them drive any different to how they did that day. Absolutely. Consideration of factors affecting fitness for duty. We're going to kind of go through these. Let's just have a quick. I'm going to flash this through in a sec, just to see. So just cover your eyes. Going to flash some things quickly, try and just check ahead a bit. Okay, yeah, no, this is fine. This is the last page, and then we're going to close out. I think there are some more bits and pieces we'll pick up in the last sort of section, I think. But there's quite a lot to get through in the last bit, but I think we'll get through it without too much problem because we'll do a 2-hour job. This is already rolling on, but I'm going to finish soon because I cannot tell you how much my head is causing problems for me. Okay, is that making sense? We're kind of getting to the end of this bit. I know we've covered a lot there, and it's all quite... it's not very visual, and it's all just me reading things out and looking at pages of text, but is that... is it is that useful? Is it making sense? Is it, I don't know what we can all take from this, but AVG, why are you doing antivirus check right now? Bad timing. Anyway, so fatigue. There's no evidence that fatigue influenced the actions of the Carmont signaller when he decided to authorise our train to travel northwards, and it's likely that most other signallers would have made the same decision in the same circumstances. However, RAIB has found that his shift pattern included a number of potentially fatiguing factors identified by the Office of Railroad in its document Good Practice Guidelines, Fatigue Factors. Okay, this is relevant. This is worth looking at. The signaller previously worked a 12-hour night shift from Sunday the 9th into Monday, and a 9-hour night shift from Monday the 10th into Tuesday. He reported having a normal sleep when he returned home at about 8 a.m. on Tuesday the 11th. His next shift then started at 21:47 hours, so he had been on duty for nearly 12 hours by 9:28 on Wednesday the 12th of August. His shift finished at 9:45. Oh, these things always happen, don't they? It really was the end of his shift. This meant 4 Officer Rail and Road potential fatigue factors were present when he authorised the northwards movement of our train. Network Rail is advised that the shift pattern complied with with their standard and national rostering principles in force at the time. The matter is not pursued further in this report, as RAIB has previously made recommendations concerning fatigue risk management for signallers and for other railway industry staff. The driver of our train had not been rostered to work since the 5th of August. Witness evidence indicates that he retired to bed about... you know who that would be giving evidence there. It's heartbreaking. About 8:30 on Tuesday the 11th, and the RAIB concludes that he was probably well rested at the start of his shift just after 6:10 on the 12th of August. Yeah. So... Other factors. Rail industry employers, including Network Rail and ScotRail, have procedures for staff in safety-critical roles to inform line managers the details of any medication or drugs that are being taken before they undertake any safety-critical work. Both companies also require employees in such roles who have been involved in an accident or incident to be tested for drugs and alcohol. The Carmont signaller was not tested for drugs and alcohol following the accident. Network Rail has advised that this was because he had fully complied with rules and regulations in respect of train movement and safety-critical communications. There is no evidence that the signaller was unfit for duty, and his actions during the morning do not suggest that he was in any way impaired. Our driver was taking medication prescribed by his doctor. Although the driver informed his employer that he was taking medication, there is some doubt as to whether it was aware when his prescribed dosage was subsequently increased, despite his doctor's notes indicating that he had said his employer was happy for him to increase the dosage. The post-mortem analysis confirmed the presence of this medication with no evidence of an excess dosage. Records indicate that the driver had not been involved in any safety incident since being prescribed the medication, other than 2 incidents caused by members of the public. RAIB has carefully considered the medical evidence and consulted with an independent medical expert. It has found no evidence that the driver was medically unfit for driving duties on the day of the accident. And I think that's a point at which we will stop, actually, there, I think. Yes, Tom is kind of pointing out an interesting thing here, which is why is someone in a safety critical role being made to work a 12-hour night shift? Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we'd have to employ more staff if they work shorter shifts, I think, and that's the balance we've currently got at the moment, is that 12 hours is an acceptable length given the pressures we're under as a railway and tightening of signalling numbers so it's probably a discussion that we're not going to have here, but it's an interesting thing to raise, absolutely. Right, so that's the report. We're going to continue that in 2 weeks' time. As ever, this is available on all podcasting platforms. I know it's another subdued one. This is a difficult subject, but I think it's worth it. I honestly think it's really important and worthwhile to pick through the report in detail like this, because there's a lot we can learn. And given the infrequency of fatal accidents like this, incidents that result in a fatality from a derailment, I think it's worth us picking through in the detail, because there is a lot we can learn. And I will round it all out at the end of the last episode, we'll whether it's the next one or maybe one in another couple of weeks after that. I think we'll manage it in the third, but I will cluster all of the things we've learned, I think, into one. But yes, you can listen to this on all good podcasting platforms. Also, yeah, it's a very good point, actually. In fact, I'm going to go big... actually, I'll come back to that in a minute. Let me continue cracking on this, and then I'm going to come to the point that's just been made in the chat. You can support the more of this to happen. Support me at patreon.com/GarethDennis. The merchandise, indeed, the Abolish the Treasury mugs are up on the Masket website. You can order those, and in fact, I would vigorously recommend that you do so. I think I've ordered myself one to have in the office. That'd be nice. PayPal.me/GarethDennis for loose change. My brain is pulp. Discord, GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord is where the chat that's happening right now over here is continuing to happen in the Discord server, and I'm sure there'll be lots of discussions about shift lengths because that seems to be happening a lot at the moment, which is very interesting. Ned Carlson pointing out that we don't even want to know what the shifts that the BNSF is imposing at the moment. Crikey, I don't want to imagine that. We all work far too many long shifts in the UK because we have had our unions have been successively weakened over decades and decades. Anyway, next week, it's a big news episode, and we're going to be covering all sorts of shenanigans because all of the news is piled up so much because I've not had time to add news to. I don't want to make this a habit because it's the whole point of the news is it's a bit of a quick intro and it's topical. But we've got a huge pile of news things. Huge pile of news things that we'll go through. Some of them fun, some of them a bit more subdued, but mostly it's there's some fun stuff in there. So it's a bit of a change in tone, but that's we hopefully should be some entertaining stuff in there to wind us up and get us banging our heads and getting angry about the Treasury. I'm not going to say anything about what's currently the thumbnail for this episode, but those of you who can see it in the video can be angry about it with me. So. The week after that will be part 3 of this mini-series about Carmont, and I think we'll finish up for that episode. I think we'll draw it to a close by that point. Yes, I think we will. It's a little more straightforward to run through, I think, than some of the other stuff. Particularly this episode, which has ended up being quite fiddly, and you have to kind of run through stuff again. Will Deacon says there's some breaking news on HS2. Oh, interesting. Well, what is it, Will? Anyway, right. Let's get my big face up. Oh, you can see. It's fine. I don't look too bad, but trust me, I don't feel great at all. Campaign for North East Rail pointed out a very good point, and I wanted to just point out this is why unions are important, because the current maximum turn length for drivers is 10 hours, and that's for ScotRail, but other train operating companies will have those sorts of things in place thanks to the unions ensuring that safety is a thing. We need our unions, support them, don't get angry at them, and if you can, support them in every way you can. We are going to have a TSSA union episode because, where's my badge? My card is up there. Because it's the TSSA's 125th anniversary, I believe. So we're going to get someone from the TSSA to come and join us. But, anyway, right, so let's... I'm going to ignore what's going on in the chat now. There's some HS2 stuff, but it's time for bed, yeah. In fact, I've got a call with some people, but other than that call, maybe people are talking about scrapping the Goulburn link. Oh, great! Well, fantastic. I knew it would happen. IRP gets worse and worse with every passing moment. Right? Yes, I've tested myself lots of times, and I shall continue to do so. Am I coming to Sheffield to celebrate the TSSA? Is that a thing? Will should send me a message offline. Any other questions or thoughts before I go? Everyone who's been with us and everyone who's listening, we'll see you. We'll see you next week. It's been hopefully an interesting one, but I will see you next week. And in the meantime, you can get me to rate your buffers on Twitter, which apparently is all that Twitter is for anymore. Right. Adios, everyone. See you soon. Bye.